Today's video, we are going to be talking about the financials of getting your book out and the financials of writing. Specifically, what costs should you be keeping track of? What should you be keeping the receipts of? What can you write off on your taxes? When it comes to your taxes, anything that is for work purposes, keep track of that. Now, this means if you bought Word, the program for on your computer, specifically for writing, you can use that as a write-off for when you first start your business as a writer, because that was a startup cost of your business. If you wouldn't have Word, if you were not writing, that's something that you can possibly write off. Now, with that, if you are using it for recreational purposes, you have to keep track of how often you are using it for professional purposes and how often you are using it for recreational purposes. And then you can split, if it's a reoccurring cost, then you can split the price of how much it costs. Say you need to get an update, then the percentage, say you 80% of the time you use Word just for work. Now 80% of the cost of Word you can now write off as an expense for work as a writer. Other things to keep track of. Every book you buy. Now, anything that you are using to hone your skills as a writer, this also counts. Now this means whether you are reading something with the intent of becoming a better writer or not, because it is a writing material, because it is a book, and you are someone that is going into writing books professionally, this counts as a business expense. You can write off, keep track of every book that you buy. I would definitely recommend also keeping track of, if you are going to a cafe to write, that's something that I like to do, or did. Can't do it right now, but when I was sitting at my desk and just writing just wasn't happening, I would go to a cafe, and being able to be in a slightly different environment, that helped me write. Now, if you are going to a cafe or a restaurant specifically to write or specifically to read, keep the receipts of how much you spent on your food and on your drink, because that counts as a business expense. That was a work lunch date, something like that. Now, if you also go and you go to coffee with a friend and you end up talking about writing, you end up talking about books, that also counts. You are talking about work, you are talking about your craft. That's something to keep track of. You can keep those receipts and write it off as a business expense when it's time to file your taxes. Something else to keep in mind is if you are driving to places specifically to do writing, work-related things. So when I rode to the library to be on the author panel, that counts. The expense of the books that I brought with to sell, that counts as a work expense. The gas that I spent on driving to the location, that counts. If you are part of a writer's workshop like I am, keep track of your miles, keep track of the money you are spending on notebooks and pens and highlighters and anything else that you are using for that workshop, because you are there using those resources specifically to hone your skills as a writer. So that counts as a work expense. Now, with all of these things, I had mentioned a little bit about percentages. If you have a reoccurring cost, or if you have something and you are also using it solely for pleasure, as far as, for instance, I can't write off the total expense of my computer because I also watch YouTube videos on there. I also just watch movies. I'm not just writing on my computer. Therefore, I can't write off my computer as a work expense. The same goes for my office. I can't write off currently my office as a work expense as far as the percentage of the mortgage that goes towards the square footage of the house, because this space is also used for pleasure as of right now. However, if you do have a small amount of space in your home, say you just have like a smaller closet that you have converted to being specifically your writing nook, and you only ever write in that nook, you don't hang out in there or anything like that, you're not playing games in there, you can find the square footage of that and then write off that space within your home as a work expense, because that is your home office. That area is now a work expense. So that's something that if you do have an area where you always just work, put down how big of a space that is and write that off. I would recommend, especially for the first year or two of doing this, that you get a professional to help you file your taxes. So find someone that does this professionally and ask them questions and learn from them about this process. Clarify what you are using for work, what you're mostly using for work, and what you kind of use for work, and learn from them how to then adjust the percentages and make sure that you are filing correctly. Now, the good thing is there's actually a lot of things as writers that we can write off. So like I said, all the books that we buy are technically a work expense, because even if we aren't intending to learn about writing from those books, we are learning how to write from those books. You can also write off, like I said, pens, paper, anything that you are using for writing, and then also anything you're doing to gain experience or knowledge about something that you are then going to write about. Dan Brown talked about how multiple trips to Europe, he was able to completely write them off because during those trips, and it's a certain percentage, I think it has to be at least half of the time or 40% of the time. If I can find it, I will link it below. If not, I will just edit this part out completely. If you take a trip, say to France, because you are going to write a book that takes place in France, that entire trip is now a work expense. And that's very helpful. And this also applies to things like, you know, if you were to buy throwing knives because a character uses throwing knives and you want to have some more hands-on time with those, so that way you can better understand how they function, how it would affect the character's movements, things like that. That is now a work expense. So keep that in mind. If you are getting something because, well, I'm curious about it because I want to write about it, that's now a work expense. If you're going to a restaurant to try some sort of food because a character likes that food or cooks that kind of food, when you go out and try that food out, that's now a work expense. If you take a sushi rolling class because a character likes sushi and there's a scene in your book where they're rolling sushi as they're talking about the big villain that's about to attack them all, those classes of learning how to roll sushi, that's now a work expense. Writing is not cheap, so anything we can do to help lessen the financial burden of writing helps us be able to write more. So I definitely recommend, if you don't have the receipts right now, if you just have thrown them away, start keeping those receipts. I would say if you're not very good at Excel, I would firstly say that you should at least become acquainted with it. It makes keeping track of your financials, keeping track of your expenses. That's how I kept track of all the expenses for my first book. I would recommend trying to get familiar with it. It's pretty simple. Once I have a prettier desk, I will definitely do a budgeting video where we go through Excel and how to keep track of everything, and then how to have it do the math for you, which is so nice. But if you really aren't there, at least keep track in Word or a hard copy of some kind. I would also recommend that you keep multiple copies, just in case something gets wiped. If you do only have digital copies, email it to yourself, have it on your computer and in a cloud, if you are tech savvy enough to have that kind of a thing. But keep track of your expenses. All you have to do is keep track of it, and then when you do file your taxes, what were your business expenses for this year? And then just give them the number, and once you have that total, you have it and you're good. Keep track of it, like keep it, make sure you still have those documents, make sure you still have those receipts for several years. Every penny helps. Every penny will help you lessen the financial burden of the very expensive cost that it is to write a book. So thank you very much for watching. Likes, comments, and subscribes are always wildly appreciated, and I will see you in the next chapter.